When we're finally starting to feel less anxious less often, when we're maybe even getting back to feeling what we might describe as somewhere near normal, when at last, after all we've been through, it seems like we might be out the other side of our anxiety issues, how do we stop ourselves from living in fear of it all happening again? I'm Tim Box, and in this video I'll be explaining how we avoid potential anxiety relapse and get on with living our life without anxiety getting in the way. Let's do it. So welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time, I'm Tim Box. I'm a mind coach, and for more than a decade now, I've been working with people to help them overcome all sorts of emotional and psychological issues, and in particular, helping them get control of anxiety. So hit the like button, share this video, and let's get into it. Let's begin with a story. I once saw a client who was experiencing huge amounts of anxiety over a specific work issue. As some of my clients are, she was also seeing another therapist at the same time as me. She came to see me because she wasn't getting quite what she wanted from the other sessions. We did a session, it went really well, and she left feeling great. She then returned to her other therapist the next week and explained she was feeling much better now, and she really felt she was on the other side of her anxiety issues. That therapist then said, "Okay, now all we need to do is manage potential relapse." These words instantly sent her anxiety through the roof. Now, fortunately, we got this sorted fairly quickly in our next session, but this story rather neatly sets up the message of this particular video. I've lost count of the amount of clients I've seen who sort out their anxiety only to cause themselves more anxiety by fearing the anxiety returning. I saw someone only last week who was telling me that they'd many times thought they were past it and thought they had the tools to deal with it, only to at some point find themselves right back where they started. Well, let's start to break this down. The main problem here is the idea that anxiety is being perceived as an illness that happens to you rather than an emotion that a part of you deliberately does. We talk relapse and we are using the language of illness. We start to see anxiety as something that we can contract whether we want to or not. And this of course makes sense because we didn't want to feel this anxious. We didn't want to get diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, and we certainly didn't want to spend large portions of our life living in fear. If we didn't ask for it, then it stands to reason that we have no control over it, right? Well, wrong. Anxiety isn't something we caught. It was a direct and deliberate emotional response in the face of something perceived to be important or even threatening. The issue now is that we're viewing anxiety itself as threatening and thus becoming anxious about anything that might potentially cause anxiety. This is why the client I just mentioned was talking about being armed with tools to manage their anxiety, as if anxiety is something broken that needs fixing. What we're referring to as relapse is actually us getting past our anxiety issues, then getting anxious about something in our life for perfectly natural reasons, but interpreting this as our anxiety illness returning, rather than life being a bit challenging right now. It's our labeling of the very natural process of feeling anxious as a relapse that actually causes us to repeat our anxiety problem. Remember, I'm also now doing a weekly live Q&A every Friday at 6 p.m. UK time where you can ask me your anxiety-related questions. So please join me for that. Also, you can now become a member of the channel and receive extra content every week, including video tutorials of my full system for change with extra insights and exclusive weekly live streams. Just hit the join button on the home page. A few years ago, I woke up one morning and just felt anxious for seemingly no reason. I very quickly became acutely aware of the fact that I was feeling something I hadn't felt for years. It was like a simmering unease, and it was causing my chest to feel tense and constricted. The thought flitted across my mind that I was having an anxiety flare-up. But then I thought for a moment and realized that even in the depths of my anxiety issues all those years ago, there was always a reason why I felt anxious. It didn't just appear. It didn't take me long to realize that my mind was simply responding to a pretty hectic day ahead of me. I'd set myself a lot to do that day, and other people, to my thinking, were depending on me getting these things done. I was tense because a part of my subconscious knew I had very little chance of achieving that. It occurred to me then that I could easily have framed my anxiety as a relapse and then caused myself to get even more anxious. After all, nobody wants to return to the days of high anxiety, and I'm no exception. But even though in those days I felt powerless, this time I decided not to lose sight of the fact that I got the other side of it by understanding that anxiety isn't simply something that strikes for no reason. It was this understanding that stopped me from overreacting to the way I felt and acknowledged the need to address the situation and circumstances surrounding what I was trying to achieve that day. Needless to say, I accepted I needed to trim my to-do list for the day and not fixate on how potentially unhappy others might be that their stuff had to wait until tomorrow. Turns out I got some, but not all of my list completed, and the world didn't end. Many of the clients I work with tell me when we finish our sessions that in a strange way, they're glad they went through the high anxiety because they now understand things better. The truth is that before we went through our anxiety issues, we were vulnerable to interpreting any spike or elevation of our anxiety levels as a sign of illness or disorder. But once we're the other side, we can see anxiety for what it is, a perfectly natural emotion. Thus, we emerge from that place as a more knowledgeable and as a result less vulnerable version of ourselves. We no longer see anxiety itself as a threat, so we no longer create anxiety about anxiety. Now, it might seem at times like the anxiety we feel isn't natural. We all have those times when we don't feel able to justify the high levels of anxiety we're feeling about a particular situation. My one was social interactions. I was always far more anxious than I can see now I ever needed to be about interacting with others, especially new people. However, I also know now that it was based on certain beliefs that shaped my reality at the time. Yes, there was a part of me cursing myself for being this way as I didn't think it was right, but there was also a part that felt those social situations were threatening enough to warrant a mild fight or flight response. The thing to remember is that every single person on the planet will have certain things that they are for some reason uncomfortable with, maybe more than they feel they should be. However, this doesn't mean your mind is malfunctioning. It just means it's making a mistake. And guess what? That's what us human beings do. It's actually how we learn. So experiencing high anxiety, even inappropriately high anxiety for the first time after you were starting to feel like you were feeling better, isn't anything to worry about. It's not a sign of illness, but a sign that even after all of this, you remain a functional, healthy human being. So when it comes to managing so-called relapse, it's worth remembering that being anxious was never the problem. The problem was how we felt about being anxious. When we understand that our anxiety can't hurt us and doesn't mean anything sinister about our mental health, then we stop fearing it and thus stop being vulnerable to anything we might refer to as relapse. Yes, you will feel anxious in the future. You might even feel it often. Yes, you will even feel inappropriately anxious at times. But no, this doesn't mean you are relapsing. It means something, for whatever reason, is challenging you right now. Life will tend to do that. Sometimes it can be scary. But of all the things that might scare us, let's try not to be afraid of our own emotions, because they are of no threat at all. I really hope this video has been of value. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Hit that thumbs up button if you like what I do, and consider subscribing to the channel for regular anxiety advice. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box, Mind Coach. Always remember to be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.